Hey, it's Can. Before we get started on this week's episode, I just wanted to give you a heads up that this episode is a heavier one as we discuss the topic of death in the family, more specifically, my family. So it might not be for you. Feel free to join us again next week if you feel like this isn't the right topic for you. And if you're going through a tough time right now and need support, please call Lifeline on 131144.
Before we get started on today's episode, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the land of the Darug people. We would like to acknowledge and pay respects to our elders past and present and the next generation coming through. Now, onto today's episode.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Level Asian podcast. Today is going to be a little bit more of a darker topic. This is a topic that's quite, personal for me. And it's about death or near-death, experiences with our parents or loved ones. So it doesn't have to be parents. It could be, any relatives. But the reason why I actually raised this initial topic when we were coming up with topic ideas was because of my experience recently with my mother-in-law and also with my grandma as well. So two very sort of quite different experiences to talk about. But the point is not necessary to relive it, but actually I feel like everyone, if not most people, will go through this at some stage. And being Asian or a migrant, you will experience this quite differently to, say, other ethnicities as well, because there's a lot of cultural nuances behind this. I'm obviously speaking at it from a Chinese person. So, if you're obviously from a different Asian ethnicity, this is going to vary. And hopefully, the goal is here to have you take away from some of this and understand, not to either make the same mistakes or even, you'll start to see as I sort of tell the stories, like be ignorant to some of the things that I didn't know when dealing with this as well. So, I think we'll get into it. And then obviously Davie and Shirley. Davie and Viv are here partly because I know Viv's you've got some experiences yourself, which you weigh in on as well. And then obviously, Davie, who, you're very family centric as well. I'm sure, you have some opinions and some things like that you want to talk about.
And
as well.
my dad was recently in surgery for heart surgery, so it was pretty big
Near
deal.
death.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So
and hopefully also just quickly, like this provides some perspective for some people to be able to empathize or sympathize with certain people who might have gone through it too.
Yeah.
So if you have friends or family that are going through something like this and you may not understand the cultural nuances or, certain things around it or how to navigate the conversation around it to support them, this might help you.
This might be some cold comfort. I guess that's probably the way to describe it for someone who might be in the middle of it right now as well. So it could be coming up. It will be coming up. It's also someone who's in the middle of it, and also people who maybe have experienced it, and just sort of, I guess, comparing your experience with, say, mine and ours, for example. So for context, I guess, to lay the sort of foundation, the backstory, I was traveling for about a year, so I was having the best time of my life. I was, this was around 2019 April when I sort of decided to take a year off and went traveling, and Iris, my wife, and I. Girlfriend at the time, we, this was like something that we'd built up for many, many years and saved up for. So, pandemic went down, and I remember very vividly when, like ScoMo was like, had a press conference and he basically said, borders were closing, you either, like, all Aussies need to come back. I remember that day very vividly because I was sitting in my Airbnb in Bangkok going, fuck, I gotta come back. I wasn't planning on to, I was planning on going to Bali. We made the decision that it was safer because there was so much uncertainty to go back. And, as fate would have it, we went back to Sydney shortly afterwards. And I didn't know it at the time, but Iris's mum, my mother-in-law, was she was complaining of, sort of difficulty, I think, swallowing or some, a lot of reflux. And seeing the GP, the GP recommended that she went and get an endoscopy. And so we just come out of quarantine. We did like 2 or 3 weeks of quarantine. And this was like self-imposed quarantine. I just moved back home with my parents and she moved back in with her parents. I got the news one day where, she apparently, this was around about, pandemic was going around about January, I think it was, wasn't it? Or when it was sort of quite serious. It wasn't January. It was March.
Yeah.
And her her specialist, so her gastroenterologist, who was the one who did the endoscopy, was actually going on holidays. So he hurriedly did her endoscopy and then said, look, we'll call you when I'm back to see the results. And she got the phone call literally a week later when he was supposed to be on holidays. And so already when you get the phone call like that, you already know it's probably not good news. So they went and they got the results. And then I remember very vividly getting the text from Iris. I asked her, I said, how did it go? And she said, it's not good. It's skin cancer, right? It was melanoma. And so in my head, I'm like a positive person always. And I said, okay, it's skin cancer. It's not like it's a death sentence. There's, depends on how far down the track it is and all that sort of stuff. And so I remember she came, they sort of, it was her dad and her mum and herself, and they came back. They came over to my place. My parents were at work. I was the only one at home. And she was just like bawling her eyes out, like coming in, right? And I remember like as we dug deeper into her diagnosis, it turned out to be something called mucosal melanoma, which is a very, very rare form of cancer, let alone melanoma. And it's basically, instead of like on the surface level, which is, they call it like subcutaneous, it's like melanoma on the inner linings of your mucus or whatever. I can't remember the exact term. And it was something like the survival rate of this was like non-existent. It was like within 5 years, you're guaranteed to die. So it was pretty intense to find out. Because I you sort of go down the Google rabbit hole of like, WebMD and finding out about these things. And I was like searching basically for like anything that gave me any positive reassurance that maybe she would have a good chance of like surviving. And it was like literally nothing. And that night, because I told her, I said, why don't you just like stay over together? It was just a night of her just being like a wreck and me just trying to do my best to comfort her. I couldn't tell her that it was going to be better, but I could, really just say, hey, like, like it just put a positive spin on anything. It was like, it's, she's still alive. She's still got time. You can still do many things together. That kind of talk. And we didn't really tell her, the prognosis of her diagnosis. And I don't know if the doctors did tell her. And so the next big steps were really just around looking at treatment. And so, the first thing we did was obviously to go look for a specialist. We ended up calling around, and I remember finding the Melanoma Institute, and I can't remember the name, but it was female. She was like female Asian. She's very well renowned for melanoma. Based over at Royal Prince Alfred in Camperdown. And she said, come in, you had to pay for a private consult. But she was lovely. And basically, she was very understanding and basically told her, your next best steps are literally like to get staged and to find out how far along the cancer was. And then she said, look, it's a very aggressive form of cancer. It's very malignant. So you need to make a decision fairly quickly. And then from there, essentially the best course of action was to start with immunotherapy, like non-invasive. So immunotherapy, for anyone who knows, is like basically just like a drug that you take. I think she took it through IV. And if for the right person or the right type of cancer, can help the cancer regress or at least stop growing. Unfortunately for her mum, she wasn't responding because they were saying if immunotherapy works, it's like you start to get nauseous and you get these like side effects. Her mum had like zero side effects, no side effects whatsoever. So that was pretty tough. And eventually it was like, well, you don't have a choice now. You have to go get it basically like removed. So the build up to the surgery, this was like, she was taking immunotherapy she got diagnosed around March and she was doing immunotherapy for like, I want to say like 2 or 3 months, and like things like chemo and that sort of stuff just wasn't an option because they're saying like there's very low chance that it'll work. It's basically surgery. And and then to cut a long story short, we got recommended a very, very good surgeon. And it was major surgery. It was like a 5-6 hours surgery. And what they had to do was basically just remove her entire esophagus. and also some lymph nodes up the top as well. So her voice changed when she came out. They basically remove the esophagus, and then they pull the stomach up, and then they stitch it with what remains up the top. And so her ability to, I guess, eat meant that she couldn't eat as much. She'd get full very easily. And it was a very long recovery, I guess, basically. And fortunately, because of how good the surgeons were, she survived. And, the surgery was around about July when this basically happened. So, what was that? That's like 5 months of that process. And so, when you think about how many doctor visits you had to do and that sort of stuff, it was pretty tough going.
How often did you visit the doctors or hospital?
I don't remember too much of it now, to be honest, because it was a couple of years ago. But I recall it was at least every couple of weeks, either by treatment or it had to be a consultation afterwards or doing some kind of tests, right? And but after the surgery was done and they had it removed, they actually made it, and this is like, doctors are very clinical, and this is the thing that I sometimes have a gripe with doctors. When he called us up, because that day of the surgery, she went into surgery that morning. That entire day was like really tough because you don't know what news you're going to get. You're just waiting, right? You're just waiting ages. Like you would know probably with your dad's surgery that was probably, a similar feeling, right? Yeah. And it was a very risky surgery as well. They were like, she could die on the surgery table, basically. She could bleed out. And he called Iris, and he basically said to her, "Oh, surgery went well. We removed everything we could, and plus more. Like there was margin, because they always remove a bit more just in case there are cells there, because obviously cancerous cells, if they still remain in your body, they can grow into others." And I remember actually even before, like the day of the surgery, and even the days leading up to it, she couldn't actually swallow anything anymore. Like she was constantly just vomiting. So you had to do the surgery. So she came out and she was in ICU. She was recovering, and so we would visit her every single day. And this was I don't know if Noel remembers. This was when we started up the business, and so I think there was a while where I was just like going to the hospital every day.
Yeah, definitely. It was definitely early days.
Yeah,
for sure. It was within the first year of starting the business, and like we were going full steam ahead.
Yeah,
everything was just like
so we were doing business startup and dealing with this at the same time. I actually don't know how I coped actually during that time. Whilst managing all of this, and then plus like I think resetting myself, because like I done a year of travel, so I literally like whether it's I didn't even have a car. I was like borrowing my parents' car, I think, during that time, because I sold my car.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, so I was like, I had nothing. I was like, came back with zero. And so going back to it, she survived, and she was recovering quite well, and then from there it was much more like okay, cool, like some level of going back to normal life.
But was that surgery to like treat or to prevent, or like it was just to delay?
She was stage 3.
Yeah.
So stage 3 is quite late. I think it goes up to 4. I could be wrong. Could be 5. And so this is, I was going to get to that, which was basically the doctors said, and this was her oncologist, had basically said, it's going to come back. Like we just had a moment to breathe. And we're like, surgery's done. She survived it. Great. Go back to normal. First consult, she's like, it's very likely it'll come back. So it's just like you have a ray of hope, and then just door shuts straight away like that. But I think we were just so grateful that like we basically were buying more time. That's basically what it was. The surgery was to buy more time. And she managed, I think, a couple of years, like 2 years, which was quite a good result.
Yeah.
As a result, because a lot of people don't last more than a few months, like, apparently, with this particular type of cancer. And so she recovered, and I think she definitely a lot changed, like naturally, because it's such a traumatic event. She changed a lot. She was already very religious, but she became even more religious, praying every day. She was Buddhist, like way healthier, in terms of, although she was quite healthy as it is, right? She was vegetarian, and exercised a lot more. So she was almost like trying to make up for lost time. And she would just have to go back every 3 months to get tests done to make sure that she was still in remission. And so that lasted 9 months, I think it was. It could be wrong. Again, bit blurry for me. But yeah, and when they found out, they're like, okay, it's back. It was kind of oncologist. I wasn't at the consult. But I remember we were talking about it, and she basically didn't want any more treatment. Like she had enough. Like that, I think that surgery really traumatized her. Yeah.
I understand because it's actually quite relatable to me. Like my parents have refused treatment or just don't want to be in the hospital. There was one time where my dad had surgery, and he had heart surgery, which is really big surgery, like open heart surgery. And it happened like probably about, I don't know, end of last year. And it was very random. Like out of nowhere, he called me at 3 a.m. and he said to me, my mom called me and he said that dad's got breathing issues. Can you come now? And the thing is, they called me, but usually my brother's the one that looks after the health of the family. And because I'm dealing with finances, but I felt really bad. But the week before that, I told my mom and dad to, hey, back off on my brother because my brother's very busy and he's just going through some things. So can you just like, not for give us some time to,
some space. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I found out when I got there and I was like, what's going on? And then my mom told me dad's like, can't breathe. He was trying to mow the lawn.
Oh, he overexerted himself.
Yeah. And like he was trying to mow the lawn and he, like normally my brother mows the lawn for him, but I told him not to call my brother.
Yeah.
So
you feel guilty?
Yeah, I felt very guilty. I was about to take him to the hospital and then I gave him an asthma puffer because I thought it was just a breathing problem and I have asthma. So he started feeling better again. So it was all good. And then out of nowhere, a couple of days later, same thing happened. Took him to the hospital, got some checks, found out he had some issues with his heart. And then they had to do like bypass surgery and, just out of nowhere, just turned upside down and we had to take dad to the hospital.
Fuck.
Yeah. And they didn't like exactly what, the way you felt, that the doctors didn't tell us what was going on. They couldn't promise that everything was going to be fine. They just said, this is what you need to do. You just need to do the surgery.
Yeah.
And then we didn't get enough information at first. So for the first couple of weeks, it was just like very tough for the family because I'm lucky that my brother knows a lot about, he's in the medical field. So he knows a lot about that stuff. So he was just saying he was telling us the chances and what could happen, what can't happen, what should be okay. If my parents will be okay. But it freaked us out completely. And my dad was a bit lost at that time. And I know that my dad had these talks with us. Like he started thinking about life and his mood changed. He used to smoke so much. And then when he was in the surgery, when he was after the surgery that he had, it was very successful. So we were really lucky in that sense. But then my dad started having issues with smoking withdrawals. He's been smoking since he's like 13 or 12 years old. So now that he hasn't spoken for like a week, he started having really, really bad withdrawals. And he was just like saying some things that were very traumatizing to my family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he also just wanted to go home. Like he was just saying weird things. He was just like, I need to go home now. And he just refused treatment. And I'm very happy, glad that we went to the right hospital that looked after my dad, and they spoke the language that my dad spoken. So they were able to keep him in the hospital. But yeah, if my dad managed to get out or, they couldn't control my dad, that it could have ended pretty bad. Yeah. Apparently it got to a point where my dad started, I think he started getting delirious. Yeah.
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 Yeah, I can relate to that, and I'll probably touch on that a bit later because very similar, almost like a level of distrust of doctors. I don't know what it is. I think it's a language thing, but it was really tough, and very similar. I think she, as soon as the surgery finished, she didn't want to stay for that long. She wanted to get out as soon as possible because it's sterile. I totally understand. I was like, I've spent more time in the hospital in the last 2 years and I'm not even patient. And it's like,
It's not
I don't envy doctors and nurses and, anyone who works there because it's a fucking hard job. I'm not even complaining about doctors being clinical. They have to be because they can't be emotionally invested in any way. They have to just tell you the facts and tell you when you need to know it, right? So it's just hard to process when you get given news like that, right? Especially when you're very emotional about the whole thing and trying to just have some level of positivity in the whole thing as well. So, going back to it, she every 3 months and go back and do the checks. And finally, when we found out that it was back, she refused treatment. And so really, actually, we just carried on normal life during that period of time. I think she genuinely felt that she could, she was a really big practitioner of like Eastern medicine, and she felt that Eastern medicine was a better alternative than how invasive Western medicine is. And did a lot of things like she'd go to go see like Chinese doctors, and then she'd get like prescribed like a different types of Chinese medicine to brew at home and drink and things like that, but nothing really that sort of obviously helped. I guess my experience or my job was really just to make her feel as normal as possible. Go and visit her as often as possible. Even the conversations you have, you can't you don't want to I guess make her feel like she's dying. Like you just have to just crack jokes. And one of the things that was really conflicting for me was talking to her as if she was going to keep living.
Like the future.
Like you just talk about the future as if when you get better, this is, I was like, that was fucking hard for me.
But deep down,
But you deep down, you're like, oh, when you get better, we'll go out and eat, we'll do this and that. I don't know if she knew or she didn't, because it was actually quite hard to find out, figure out near the end. But, she'd be like, yeah, that kind of thing as well. She was really actually positive about it. She was really strong. Now, even thinking about it, because I talked about my mum's very close to her. They used to, because they live so close, they used to spend time. My mum saw her as like a sister, basically. And so besides Iris and her dad, I think my mum actually took it harder than I did through the whole thing, because she was so emotionally invested as a relationship as well. So yeah, I mean, she was very positive about it. She dealt with it in a very proactive kind of way. But again, we talked about this in other episodes, which is our parents are not educated in this sort of stuff. They don't get taught these, we haven't even been taught these skills on how to deal with this sort of stuff, right? A lot of it is just through experiences and anecdotally hearing it from other people. And so near the end was obviously where it was toughest. And, a couple of things that was really hard to process for me. And it's I've talked about this previously, off camera, watching the movie, The Farewell. Fucking, I don't know. I think I just coincidentally saw it. Maybe Netflix algorithm. I don't know. I don't know. Have you watched the movie?
No.
Okay, so The Farewell's Aquafina.
No.
And it's basically about how she finds out that her grandma's got a terminal illness. And so she's in the US, she's Asian American, but her grandma's in Shanghai, I think it is. And she has to, and then her parents don't want her to go back. Her parents are going back to obviously see the grandmother, but they don't want to tell the grandmother that she's dying, which is a very Chinese thing, or at least in my experience, I feel like it's probably other cultures as well. And the reason why they don't do this is because they feel like they can't deal with the news. The Chinese term is they will collapse, they will faint as a result of it. They will just completely shut down and not be able to function.
I thought it was also a superstitious thing, you don't talk about death, right?
Maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, watching that movie, I was watching literally it
Your
playing
life
out.
unfold.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Because she was really conflicted. She was she should know, because as we're Western raised, we're I would want to know if I'm dying, because I want to live my best life, no matter how little or how much time I have left. It's not up to other people to decide this sort of thing. But in Chinese culture, it's different. It's we're protecting you from it, so that you do live life very normally right up until the end, and you get to enjoy life. And you don't, I think what they're trying to think about is you're not worried about this impending doom that's going to happen at some stage, right? And so going back to this whole thing, it's I feel like I was in her position, because I remember when her mum called Iris, one morning, and this was about a month before she passed away, and she'd lost so much weight that she couldn't actually stand up properly. And so she couldn't support her own weight. She was skin and bones. And she tried to get out of bed because she was still living at home, and her dad was working. So she was still self-sufficient during that time. And she fell over, and she couldn't get back up because she had no muscle in her at all to get back up. And I think I was supposed to go to work that morning, and then Iris told me, and I said, no, we are picking her up, and we're going to take her, and she's going to come and live with us. And this now going into the conversation about the intricacies of Chinese culture, for example, and being an only child and that sort of stuff is like, I didn't realize what I was getting myself into by doing this. I think very black and white, being Western raised, and also partly I think my family's shielded me a lot from, these sort of things that I was like, she's just going to live with us and we're going to take care of her and it's just going to be a family effort. But Iris, obviously knowing the culture much better, knew that she, as the only daughter, as the only child, had to take care of her mum. And I can do it so much, but it's also not practical for me because I'm running a business. I'm not going to be there 24. She basically was like, what are you going to do? You're just going to like stay at home all day and just look after her? And she will expect it, because the parents do, just like in her case, because they're traditional, she's going to expect it of you. Like once you open up the can, you can't put the lid back on again. It's too late. And so like the first week or so, I was basically helping her anything from eating right through to going to the bathroom, going to bed, all that.
But did you not consider like, the, I forget the name of it, starts with P, but it's some care, palliative care?
Palliative care?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, we definitely looked at palliative like not long afterwards. I was thinking even, like I was like, look, and Iris was pregnant at the time as well. There was an extra dynamic there, dude. So she was like, I think 6 months in.
I think she was more than that.
She was pretty deep into pregnancy,
along.
so she was quite large, and it was hard for her to. She couldn't pick up her mum because, like you don't.
She had a belly.
Yeah, she had a belly, and you don't want to put the baby at risk and that sort of stuff. So it ended up, and then there's the guilt of her seeing her husband have to pick up her mum all the time and take your mum to the bathroom. Like it's a fucked up situation to be in. And I didn't think much of it. Like, I'm like, whatever, she's my mum. That's how I saw her. I said, I don't care if I have to, if my mum, meaning my mother-in-law, is naked and I have to wash her and bathe her, I'm okay with it because she's family. But of course, it's like there's an element of shame to her, meaning my mother-in-law, if like she's like, my own daughter can't look after me and my son-in-law is the one who has to look after me. It's
a degree of separation as well.
Yeah, there's still one layer, but it's that quote that you shared with me, which is the 养儿 fan lao, which is the insurance policy that you have kids because they're supposed to look after you when you get older. Right?
Yeah, man, it's so insane. It's a Chinese thing too.
Yeah.
And how did it start? Like, why do people say that?
I think it's it comes from its roots around farming because like Chinese culture used to be like agrarian. Like it was like everyone had a farm, everyone was in a village, right? And so the idea is that you have kids because they then can, help you work the fields and help you, like support you because there's no freaking retirement funds. Your income is your land, like these sort of things. And so kids was seen as a pathway to ensure that you could live out your life okay once you couldn't earn your own income anymore. And so whilst we don't do farming now, that belief is still there. So going back to the situation here, it's like it was really tough because Iris was super conflicted by the whole thing. Like I'm not here to speak for her, but I think she, I talked about this beforehand, saying, "Is it okay to talk about this?" She said, "Yes," because as long as it helps people, this is the big thing. And I don't know if I have a solution. If I were like, again, if you're in this position or you're going to be in this position, because the other thing is like you can't put them in a nursing home. Like that's a no-go zone
For Chinese,
for Chinese. You can't put your parents into
it's
it.
like disgraceful or something like that.
Yeah, it's like you are the worst child if you did that.
But I actually read about this. I read this article. It was a research done, and they were like, some professor said this, and they said that basically, like, if you don't put them in a nursing home because, like, it's disgraceful, but you don't, like, what you're gonna do is you're gonna leave them at home and you're gonna go to work. Leave your mum at home or your dad, and then you're gonna go to work, and they're gonna be very lonely at that time, and they're just waiting for you to come back to visit or for you to come back from work. And that's sometimes more suffering than being taken care of in a nursing home where they've got the facilities, and some of those places are built for Asian parents.
Community.
Oh yeah. There's definitely options, but I think
they can't understand.
It's very complex. They can't. Talking sense into them with this sort of stuff is like incredibly difficult.
That's why that saying exists, because that's all they believe in.
Yeah, it's facts for them. It's not even belief. It's like trying to tell you like the sky's blue. You're like, it's fucking blue. Like, what are you talking about? You know, that kind of thing.
So was it the parents that fought that, or was it both, like Iris and?
Iris feels guilt doing it, so it's not an option for her.
So it's both. Yeah.
So it's both.
of them.
And
But also, just quickly for context, like Iris grew up in
China. So
Yeah.
she came here when she was like 17. So she's like same age as me, 30,
And
32.
single
33.
child
So she spent half her life there, half her life here. Very well versed with understanding the cultural nuances of Chinese and, you know, this sort of stuff. And it was just like stuff I just didn't understand. Like I didn't understand until I went through it.
Yeah, man. Like you literally just have to quit your whole job. Like
You have to give up your life.
You have to give up your life.
You actually have to give up your life. And the fact that her mum, this was a 2-year process. Like I've said this before in the past, I was like, it's like watching a car crash play out in slow motion because you know how it's going to end. You just have to watch it very slowly. And it's happening step by step, right? Second by second. And fortunately or unfortunately, like because we came back from travel, Iris she wasn't working. And there was no reliance on her to work. I was starting up the business. So we were both like on really like very little income during that time. And I thank God for my parents, you know, they were so supportive during this time, right? They would say, don't worry about any of that. Like just focus on looking after her.
This episode is produced and brought to you by Social Wave. Social Wave is a strategic content marketing agency helping businesses grow revenue using video, podcasts, and SEO. Head on over to socialwave.com.au to find out more. Now back to the show.
Going back to the whole farewell comparison, I remember when she fell over, she couldn't get back up. We were looking after her, and I think it was like literally like that happened on a Monday or a Sunday. By Wednesday, we over multiple conversations and her in a better mood because she was with us instead of being at home. We convinced her to go see a doctor because remember, right up until that point, she denied treatment. Yeah, so I said, just go see the doctor, see how you are. And maybe there's some niggling stuff because her feet had swollen up because her body's ability to process things was like starting to like fall apart. So her feet were literally like, it was like giant cankles basically. And I said, even if the doctor can get rid of that, like you'll feel better, you know, you'll like your day to day will just be better. And then when you're done, we'll come back home. So we took her to the hospital and they said the fastest way was to go to the emergency ward, which was like literally, you know, a half day to 2/3 of a day ordeal because, and mind you, she was so weak. It's like she can only stay upright for like so long. So to her credit, she was upright for like several hours when usually she can only sit for like half an hour and she has to go lie down. And she had to to lie down, she needed like multiple pillows because she was so bony that her bones would like press into the bed, the sofa bed. She was lying on a sofa bed. And so she had these very specific needs just because, you know, it's so painful just to do anything. Her body was frail. Yeah, she was so frail. Went to go see doctors. They got it, did all the tests, checked her up. And then that's when the doctor said to me, he said, I think he sort of went a few layers up. There was like the ED doctor and then obviously the oncology ward. And eventually she was, we convinced her to stay at the hospital because originally we told her, we were like, no, you're going to come back same day. And had a conversation with the doctors and they were like, honestly, in our opinion, she only has probably a few weeks. And because she doesn't speak English, and I was the one that went into the ED with, because because it was COVID, only one person could go in. Iris didn't go in because she was pregnant. I was like, you are not fucking going in. And she didn't want to go in either because she didn't want to catch COVID or something and then like jeopardize baby. And her dad couldn't go in because dad doesn't speak English either. So I'm the next best option. So I went in with her and this is my ignorance. The doctor's a Western doctor. She's like, do you want to tell her? I was like, all right, well, you know. So they put a translator on the phone and the translator was the one that told her situation. And then you could immediately see her go from pretty still upbeat because, you know, she was getting treatment. She doesn't know, to her entire mood flipping. She was very quiet, very just reserved again. Just, you know, you can tell she was like processing it all. Didn't make a big deal out of it again. Her mum was just so mentally strong. But yeah, that was one tough one. And then obviously her staying overnight for a few nights. Eventually when we got the news that she had several weeks, I was there, so was Iris, so was my mum, and so was her dad. So there's 4 of us there. And the doctor told us that And I can't remember the details about it, but basically there was a couple of things where I just like, I was learning this as I went. My mum basically, prior to finding out about her prognosis and stuff like that, was basically suggesting to her, hey, you can come and stay at our place, like my mum's place, and she would look after her or should spend time with her, you know, like basically to make her feel better. But I didn't realize that was a big no to offer that on behalf of my parents when we found out that she only had a few weeks to live. And I didn't get it. And I was like, why? And they were like saying, number one, your mum wouldn't want death in her home. No matter how close people are. You don't want death. Number two, it's not good to offer that on behalf of your parents, even though they're your parents as well. And again, this is just me naive going, like we're all family. We'll just help each other.
Did your mum know about that? No.
Oh, sorry. My mum wasn't in the room at that time. So this was a different
so your mum didn't know
sorry,
that
I'm
she
jumping
was,
around a bit, but
your mum didn't know that she was like, she had 2 weeks.
my mum didn't know.
Yeah.
Correct. Exactly. And then when my mum was there and her dad was there, we found out the prognosis and we're trying to figure out what to do. And I almost blurted out to tell her prognosis, right? So sorry, jumping around again. When she was in the ED and that translator was telling her that her cancer is back, but not her prognosis, because they didn't know her prognosis until later. So when they found out her prognosis, we all sort of like walked away from her in the waiting area, and this is how it links to the farewell. I was told, we're like, you cannot tell her. We should not tell her. And I was like, why? I was like so conflicted. I was like, she needs to know, dude. Like,
because like if it was us, we want
to fucking know, dude.
Yeah.
You know? And same thing. It was like, if she got told, she will not be able to handle the news. She would just be a wreck. She'd just fall apart. And now in hindsight, when I think about it, she probably would have been. You know, just seeing her mood really sort of diminish near the end. And then so trying to deal with like, should we tell her or not? I was just like, fuck. I was like, I didn't know what to do. I was just like, all right, well, you guys, if you don't want to tell her, you don't tell her. Like, I can't force it. It's not my place to like force that agenda. So they didn't tell her.
So they didn't tell her.
She didn't know till the end.
She didn't know. But she would have kind of figured it out, right? Did she ever mention it?
I'm not sure.
But I guess it's also the mental confirmation of it if you hear it from the doctors.
When you're in denial, like I think she was in some level of denial. She felt that this was an ailment and she would get better. That she believed it till the end.
That's crazy because my dad was like he started, maybe it was the withdrawal symptoms that were happening, but he was just like, he started having like one of those talks where it's like, when I'm not here, and he started talking about that stuff.
Okay, yeah.
And then he's like, we were like, Dad, like, you're going to be okay. And he's like, no, I need to talk to you now.
Like he has to get shit off his chest.
Yeah. Like he's like, I need to have that conversation now because it may be too late. And we're like, and then we were trying to tell him, no, don't talk. Like it's because we didn't know what to say. Like we wanted him to talk, but we also trying to tell him that he's going to be okay. Like, don't think that way. So it's very hard. Yeah. And it was very hard to hear him talk to us.
Yeah, it's very hard to have those conversations. Like, you don't even know how to reply to that stuff, right? Like, all you can say is like, no, you're fine. Like, it's okay. Like, be as normal as possible. But deep down, you know, there's some level of like, it's abnormal. And this goes back to the whole thing that I feel like a lot of Asian parents of our parents' generation don't know how to deal with death themselves. Not that we know any better, but you know, we're probably somewhat a bit more exposed because I feel like Western culture normalizes death a little bit more than Asian culture. Asian culture is like very taboo. They just don't talk about it in certain ways. They talk about it in other ways, but in a much more, I feel like much more spiritual way.
Yeah.
Not so
especially
in the raw details.
Buddhist.
Yeah, exactly. So reincarnation and things like that. And so, yeah, I feel like she probably believed that she was, look, maybe I want to say she felt that she was, she felt like she was probably on recovery. And one of the things that probably gives me a level of comfort is we couldn't stay in the hospital overnight, right? And the night before she passed away, like she passed away in the morning, she actually called us up, and she basically said she had difficulty breathing, like she was getting short on breath, and you can hear her. And we were calling around saying, can someone go see her? Because, you know, like...
How did she call you guys, by the way?
She had a phone.
Oh, she had a phone.
She had a phone next to her.
Oh, okay.
So she could still speak. Very weak. And so that was a really tough one because I don't know, maybe something in me felt like I was like, oh, this feels a bit sort of near the end, but you don't know. And the phone call was just like hearing Iris just reassure. She's like, oh, someone's coming. You'll be all right. Like, again, very normal conversation. I'll see you in the morning. And then in the morning she passed away. She passed away in her sleep, which in my eyes, I was like, the comfort is that she had no pain. She passed away very peacefully. We were planning on going to see her in the morning. And as we were walking out the door, we got the phone call from the doctors and they told us what happened, that she passed away. And my mum happened to be the first one to find her. She went to visit her that morning. She got there before we did. And then she called me as well to tell me what happened.
How did your mum take it?
My mum's very Buddhist. So she was like, don't cry. Don't show sorrow because it makes the spirit uneasy to move on. So she says, all you do is pray for her. Don't touch her. Leave the body there for 24 hours because there's a lot of these cultural nuances now. We go into the details, but she's like, do not touch her. If we can delay the doctors from touching her, from taking the body away, just pray, non-stop pray. So my mom was really strong. She was like, she was amazing. And and then when we got there, actually Iris, her dad didn't want her to go see her mum.
Because of the pregnancy?
Because of the pregnancy, but also, because it would be too much for her. Like she'd be emotionally all over the place.
Or because of the pregnancy and
and then death being around.
Yes.
Pregnancy, a lot of superstition.
Yeah.
So what she ended up doing was she took the car ride with me, but then she stayed outside the hospital. Like, can you imagine being in her position, not being able to see your own mum when that shit happened?
How did she feel, or do you know how she expressed how she felt?
She was very strong. Like she coped really well. But it also fucks you up. Like she felt helpless. I think that's the biggest problem. It's like when you feel like you can't do anything. So there's a level of helplessness. And then I feel like knowing Iris, because she's someone who doesn't want to burden other people. I think she somewhat felt that she was burdening me, even though we're together, that I had to take on a lot of the responsibilities in lieu of her. Because number one, there's an element of being a daughter. Like daughter and son is a little bit different when it comes to death as well. And then of course the pregnancy, and then plus her being an only child. Yeah, so I did a lot more, I guess, than what I should normally do, which I'm happy to do. I was very happy to do, because I felt like I was helping the situation. But yeah, she didn't see her mum.
That's so literally rough.
Yeah.
It's really traumatic.
Yeah, pretty fucked up. And we can talk about the funeral process. That was a whole different fucking process. But in a nutshell, I basically planned it with her dad. And she obviously gave me inputs because she was giving me guidance. Because again, it was a Buddhist funeral. And again, I got no idea what I was doing. All I did was you just blindly follow the funeral services and they tell you what to do. And thankfully here in Australia, people were quite honest in the way they do business, including funeral services as well. And so we just found someone who recommended one to us and we just followed along, including her dad didn't really even know what to do because her dad's not Buddhist. Her dad's just Chinese. And so, so my mum found her, prayed, asked the doctors if they could delay the pick up the body. They were happy to delay it a little bit, but they couldn't delay it for 24 hours. And so it was like, you do cold comfort. You're like, look, she probably passed away at night. It was probably up to, 24 hours or whatever the period of time is. And then obviously took the body away. And then you plan the funerals. And the funeral, we did it within like a week. You have to do it pretty quickly. And that process as well.
And during that time as well, it was the Moon Festival, so that there was conflicts.
Oh yes, there was. So how Chinese are really superstitious about dates. So you had to pick a date that was good for the funeral. And what happens is when the Moon Festival is on, they say that apparently like the gates are hell open, and so it's a really bad time to have a funeral. And a lot of the dates were booked out like very far in advance. And thankfully, somehow we had like one date available that matched up with what we wanted. So we booked that date. That was the only option for us. But even that process was just like, fuck, like, just one problem after another, dealing with that. So yeah, look, all in all, like, I guess going back to the whole thing, it's like, this is, I'm sharing this because there's so many things there that I learned that I didn't even know how to deal with it. I had to learn as I went. So hopefully people, as morbid as it sounds, you're like, if you go through any degree of this, hopefully you're better prepared because you listen to this.
Yeah, the part I don't get about it is just like it's hard on the family not being able to resolve like things that were going on in their life, like their relationship, because you're never able to talk about what's going to happen. So therefore, and you can't talk about some things that maybe like you want to say sorry.
Yeah, you want to get shit off your chest.
Yeah, like you can't say it.
No, you can't.
That would
So you know what's actually crazy? This is why I think she probably thought she was getting better, is because she never got anything off her chest.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Like that would be too tough for me, for me. Like I wouldn't be able to talk about our relationship and what things that I loved and cherished and
But you know what? I said to Iris when we were reflecting, I said to her, here's the positive. You weren't working really as much. She was running her own business, but it wasn't like a full-time thing. So you got to spend more time with your mum in the last 2 years than you did over the last 10 years. Because you were overseas. Your mum came to visit you maybe like once for your graduation just to hang out with you. But I'm like, you got mother and daughter time more now because of this situation than you ever did. Imagine all the people who, and this goes back to the conundrum of thinking about like, would you rather this to happen really quickly or really suddenly out of nowhere? Or would you probably maybe like your dad's situation? Or would you rather, knowing the diagnosis and then doing it? Like, I don't think one is better than the other. But the point is that we got dealt this card and you had the opportunity to spend more time with her as a result. And there were some times where she was like riding Iris up the wall, with certain things, like just being a normal mum. And there's ironically, that was the times where you were like, oh, this feels really good because it's it's just normal. You're like, she's fucking nagging me, even though she's got cancer, but she's still nagging me, right? So I was like, I'm always see the positive in things. And, there's probably things I think because of the way we're brought up, it's you want to say things, you want to get things off your chest as well. But, you think about Hollywood and movies and there's the perfect ending and there's closure and that sort of stuff. I'm like, reality is there's not a lot of closure with a lot of families, and without having to go through another story, my grandma was the same thing. When she passed away, I was in China. She didn't get any closure. It's very sudden.
And that's I think that's the part where I think the West do it better than us.
Yeah.
Us Asians. It's the West have, they openly talk about it. And on top of that, the funeral process is you have I don't know all the names of it, but the wake and the
eulogies.
Yeah, and you talk about it and you joke around. And then at the end of the day, there's this I forget what it was. Is it the wake where they actually...
I'm not sure, yeah.
They joke around.
We did a Buddhist funeral, but yeah.
Yeah, and they start joking about it.
They celebrate it, right?
They celebrate him and, the life that they had. I didn't understand it at first. Because I when I was young, I hated funerals, and fortunately, not many people that I didn't have any close people that were part of my life that passed away, so I never understood it at all. And then what happened was, not someone I knew, I never met them, but it was my boss's mum passed away, so I everyone in the workplace was going to the funeral, so I decided I went too, and I was like, this is so uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
And then I started talking to my my cousin about it, and my cousin was explaining how it all works. I didn't get it for a few months until I just sat on it and I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, this actually makes sense. It's part of the healing process.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
But then when it comes to what you're telling me, when it comes to Asians and Chinese,
doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, it feels like they're avoiding everything and. They're making it seem like they're trying to sweep it under the rug. They're trying to do whatever it takes to make it, to pretend it's not going to happen.
I'm sure there are families who probably do the opposite and are very well prepared. I think it just boils down to the individual and the family, right? This is just one experience.
But I think what Davie was talking about is that different cultures have different ways of grieving, right? And in the West, it's more open. It's okay. Everyone cries at the funeral and, shares those stories and is more discussed. But I think, in your experience, the grieving part was kind of skimmed over a little bit, would you say?
Until you got to the funeral.
Yeah, the grieving. So we define grieving in Western society as crying. Grieving in, I think, Eastern culture, or at least Buddhist culture, is you know, because they believe in reincarnation and moving on to the next life into the Western world, as they call it, what you're doing is you're just helping them prepare to move on. Like, it's very different. It's like grieving.
It's not the end.
It's not the end. It's just the start of the next journey. So it's the paradigm thinking is very different.
Gotcha.
And so that's why my mum was like, don't cry because it's a good thing. She actually said that. She was like, this is a good thing. She's like, because now she can go to the Western world and have an amazing life, you know? And so our job as family members is to ensure that. And by doing that, pray. Pray as much as possible. Pray during the funeral. Don't stop praying. And then there's like, after the funeral process, there's 49 days. So 7 sevens, that's what they call it. Chichi. 7 weeks or 7 days, where the temple takes care of this for you, but they basically provide food and that sort of stuff. It's almost like looking after because the soul, apparently the spirits, is like sort of in this no man's land in between during this time. And so they help them. And then what you do after the 49 days is you come back and you do like this final funeral procession. And she got cremated. So then it was like your final resting place for her ashes, which was kept at the temple. And you know, hope that you can help her move on to the next life and reincarnate and whatever. Like, I mean, I don't know it that well, but yeah, very different grieving closure process. It's still grieving. Like, I felt closure doing it. But there was no tears shed. And funnily enough, because anyone who's ever been to like a Chinese funeral in China, fucking the most morbid thing, because I went through this with my grandmother. Like, you actually, and this is maybe the difference between Buddhist versus just Chinese culture, because religious and cultural. My grandma's funeral, they said they wanted you to cry. Like, people pay professional crying people to lead the funeral. And my grandma got cremated as well, and she, you actually watch her go into the furnace, the body go into the furnace, and they actually tell you to like cry and yell out to her and say goodbye. Very morbid, very raw. Whereas this particular Buddhist funeral was very peaceful. You know, you had like 2 monks who were chanting and a whole team who were chanting. And then I remember Iris's dad came out of it because he's obviously experienced both. And he said, this is much more peaceful as a process than the ones he thought that was going to happen in, you know, China. He thought it was going to be the same thing here. Yeah. And he's really scared of it. A lot of people are scared, not just him. Everyone's fucking scared of something like this because it's very uncomfortable.
I remember, like, my grandma passed away like when I was a kid, so I don't have much memory of what happened. But I do remember a time where the kids and the uncles and aunties, which were her kids, had to sleep at the funeral with her. Oh. At the resting place. Yeah. At a
around the body.
Yeah. There was a particular day that they actually had to stay overnight. And I can't remember because it was so long ago. I must have fell asleep in the car. But a lot of the kids, like us, slept in the car instead. Yeah, but I don't know. There was just so many different things that you had to do when that happened.
I think every culture is different. That's just what we dealt with. And I actually think we had it in a very simple process.
And I think it's also the way they pass away too that changes things as well.
Yes.
Because I think the way that our grandma passed away was very different from the way your way is. I don't know specifically how it happened because I was too young, so I'm not going to even go to try. But it was I just know it was different. It wasn't. It came out sudden, like it was very sudden. Yeah.
Look, I the only other thing I'll say is like, my mother-in-law, she's very fucking strong. So for someone to go through that for 2 years, I don't know how I would react. Like she was never, how do I describe it? She just had like so much mental strength no matter what she went through. And so she just, and like I talk about it with my mom, she's like, she had a lot of courage doing this whole thing. Cause can you imagine, right? Imagine you being in a foreign country, only being in the country for a few years, and having to navigate this whole deal, and just you almost have to blindly trust that your family is going to make sure that it's done as best as you can. They have to honor your decisions, and you're talking to doctors who don't speak the same language as you, and you don't know what you're up for.
You don't know the processes.
Fuck, it's fucking scary. Like, and for her to go through this process in a lot of dignity, she was very dignified till the end. Was very like I have massive respect for that because I don't think I'd be like that. I'd be I'd probably kick up a stink, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, you probably give up. Like I've seen it.
I'd probably lose it.
Yeah.
I don't think she ever lost her shit, to be honest, through this whole process. She always had it together, no matter what. So she was always very civilized in her process as well. So, yeah, I just want to say that because obviously, I'm sharing something very raw and vulnerable, but it's not to taint anyone with a bad brush, particularly my own family. But again, this is more to help other people deal with something like this because I don't get taught this sort of stuff for sure.
And thank you for sharing that because it is such a personal thing and not everyone is able to be so real about it either. A lot of people glaze over certain details or again, like try and brush it under the rug like it's not a big deal.
Yeah. But
obviously people go through this kind of shit and people have to hear it from someone else and it gives a sense of comfort for people or just a different perspective for other people too. How did you deal with it? Are you okay? I know you glaze over a lot of stuff like you are strong and you have the mental capacity for it, but in reality, it would have been tough for you.
So my way of coping is always to look at the positives. Like I keep saying it. Like, people go, are you really okay? Like, really like they're like trying to almost go, there's probably like something's going to, if I say something, maybe something's going to tick and, I'm bawling my eyes out and stuff like that. I don't think so, at least now. Partly because my coping mechanism is always to see positives with everything. Whether it's she's passed away or she's on to the better life. She suffered before, she's not suffering now. You get a diagnosis, you're like, let's look for the hope. She's been told a prognosis, you're like, you still got time.
Yeah.
So there's all these tactics, I guess, or strategies that I'm using to cope. And I think I spent most of my time or just emotionally helping, the family deal with it. And it's not that I sacrifice my own self-care as a result of it. I just get a lot of, I'm a bit like you, Davie, where a lot of my life motivation and purpose is in helping particularly my family members. Like that's where I feel best about myself as well. So the fact that I was much more involved than I normally would be, for me, was a good thing because I don't know how I'd deal with it if I was someone who had to be a bystander and just watch this thing and then have to like deal with it. That would be much harder for me, I think.
Yeah. I remember talking to you during it happening and checking up on you. And I was probably the guy going, are you really okay?
Yeah.
And then you said to me that, like, I just had to be strong for Iris and the family. Like, that was one thing that like you mentioned that like that actually made you okay because it's like you knew that you're helping them to go through it and they were probably in a worse situation than you. So it's like, at least I got to be positive and make sure that they think positively so they can, and be there to pick them up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Like, I think, I don't know. Who knows? Like, this has been less than a year. So it's still quite recent, still quite fresh. I think and then, there are certain elements that I do feel sad, thinking about it. Like, for example, with like my son and then recently seeing the family and then she's not there. And then, what caught me off guard a little bit was when my mum even said, he's like, oh, he's got some features that's like grandma, like there's some things about him that, is very similar. And then you feel very sad because she wasn't there to see him. So yeah, like that's probably the stuff that probably will catch me off guard in the future. Like these sort of little things, like lost chances or lost moments or, events. But again, you see it as like, hey, like things all happen for a reason. Like I even thought about it. I was like, maybe he's a reincarnation of her. Like I actually thought about that for a moment. I was like, maybe this whole thing is just all linked together and it's a good thing. It's like, we get to now, share our love to him and
a new life.
Yeah. Like it's, so again, maybe it's me again, looking at the positives again, right? That's just how I cope.
But it gives you some mental structure and some reassurance.
Yeah. It does. But also, like, I think maybe I'm just being too busy as well to even like stop and pause. That's the other thing, right? So, yeah, I think any advice out of this, outside of just learning what I dealt with, is just like that's how I dealt with it. Positivity, glass half full. Look for hope. There will always be hope. And if at the end of it, there's still no hope, I guess the thing I would say is like, it will get better. There's a finite timeline. And I think, actually the advice I got from my dad going through this was, he said, like the Chinese translation was like, there will be humps in life. There will be hurdles in life. There is no hurdle that's too big to get over. It might take longer, it might be taller, it might be harder, but eventually everyone has to go over the hump. And so then it's just like, his whole thing is just to say, it's not forever. And there are probably some things that are, no, actually there's nothing that's forever, right? At the end of the day, you're going to die. And then everything ends. So then the point is that not to get too fixated on the fact that you're like, oh shit, how long is this going to go for? That sort of stuff. So that's what's kept me going, because I'm like, well, there's also like a finite timeline on this as well. It's not forever.
How was the Iris, if I'm allowed to share about that? Like, are you allowed to share about
She was really strong. She was really, really strong. As someone who probably couldn't do as much as she would have if she wasn't pregnant, she took it really well. And she and I have quite candid conversations about it. And like, again, she also has moments like same as me, like when, you think about her. But I think for the most part, to be honest, her being pregnant, having a son is actually you don't want to call him a distraction, but he brings something that, maybe we would have been fixated on something different. So, she's doing well. And, now it's all about just like, every year or however frequently you pay your respects, just like you do with any other relatives as well. And now that she's a mum, she can empathize how hard it was for her mum, sort of raising her as well. So there's like all these like layers to it. But yeah, she's doing well. She's probably going to listen to this episode and probably bawl her eyes out. But like I think, again, it's like as long as it helps other people, then I think it's worth sharing. Yeah.
Thanks so much, man. Like it's like there was so many parts where I was just thinking about my life and how I had to deal with it when it eventually happens, or when a loved one, passes away. So I think for sure I would do it differently, like for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And each to their own. Like there's no right or wrong way of doing it. It's just like you just got to understand maybe there are some cultural nuances to certain things that we probably didn't realize, because we're in a really interesting position where we sit between East and West, and then sometimes that can get us into trouble. And other times it probably adds an extra dimension to things as well. So
I mean, as in like compared to like an hour ago, like I didn't even think about like half the stuff that like
we just talked about.
Because maybe, and that's exactly what you said about before, where Asians just, they don't want to think about it, and they don't want to talk about it. And that's like me. Like I just never wanted to talk about it at all until it happened. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, man, I would do it very differently from what I was thinking before. I would actually, be there, and I'll probably give up like my whole life just to be there.
And you know what? We live like our parents are going to live forever, even though we know logically that they're not. So because that happened at such a much earlier than we thought, I'm even looking at my relationship with my parents now going, it's not going to be forever. Like you should enjoy it, because you just don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And now I have little freakouts every time they're not feeling well. Because I'm just like, shit, like it could be something worse. So if there's any advice out of this, is like, fuck the little petty shit that you have problems with your parents. Like put that all aside, because it's like, it's not worth you having a shit relationship with your parents about. Like, love your parents, tell your parents what you want to say. Like, we talked about it just then. Just tell what the fuck's on your mind. Like, if you have a moment, like, you're probably going to like, if you go, oh, I love you, they're going to be like, who the fuck? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're going to get a real weird reaction. But say it, because you might not get the chance to say it, at a later stage, as well. So it's hard. Like, whatever you want to get off your chest, whatever you want to do. Like, I'm even thinking about right now, right? I know my dad really wants to travel. And so I'm just like, I'm just going to go traveling with my dad.
And exactly. That's what I'm thinking. Like that's the thing where I was thinking that I'm so fixated about money and looking after my parents, but I'm not spending the time that I need to for my parents and being there for them. And it's like, I never stop to ask them, hey, what do you want? If I were to give up work right now, where do you want to be? And then like, let's do it. And that's the thing that us Asian kids don't think about at all, because we're so fixated about making money or, working on our career, buying a house and all that stuff like that, or getting married. And we forget that, our parents are not going to be here forever. And yeah, man.
100%. And you know what? You're going to do these things and you're going to fucking have a terrible time with them. Like, I go traveling with my mum is like
nagging.
It's so hard. Like, I did it with her, like, you know, before the pandemic, and I was like, I'm never doing this again. But I know, even though we actually had an argument, like, even with that, still really good memories. Like, it's like stuff you will take with you literally to the grave, thinking about this sort of stuff. So if you got bucket list stuff, don't wait. There's like some days, not a day of the week. Just do it. Make decisions and do it, especially if you have the means to do it as well. Don't wait until your parents are too old. Because it sounds cliche. There's no guarantees in fucking life. And yeah, with Asians, you act as if you're like, you're going to live forever.
It's how they say, like, your parents, they go through a whole life with you existing in their whole life, but you only exist with your parents in a portion of your life.
100%. It's anyone, like, I think I did this on another podcast. I said, go check out a blog post called The Tail End. It's called Wait But Why, the blog post, the blog name. And he literally draws out a chart, like it's like a diagram of tally of like how many days, I think, of your life, and then how many of it is with your parents. And the reason why it's called the tail end is because by the time you graduate high school, you're already at the tail end of your time with your parents. You don't have much time left. And any of us, you know, particularly if some of us have parents who are much older having us as kids, you have even less time. And you might be one of the fortunate ones where your parents live to a very old age, but I know so many, including myself, who they didn't. You know, she was 60, early 60s. She was very young. It's the age of your dad, you know.
Yeah, my dad.
Right?
My dad's 67, so it's
there
older.
You go.
Yeah.
Right? So you're like, you're not guaranteed to hit that age.
And the health changes so fast.
Very fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen to my Mrs. Grandma, and it's just one moment out of nowhere. It's just like she was having dinner with us, like, you know, Chinese New Year, and then the next moment, like, she's so frail. So it's very scary, man. Like,
Life moves quickly.
Yeah. So you mentioned this to me, and I think it's really important for people to. So the Zen Buddhist teacher, I don't know how to pronounce this. I'm going to
Vietnamese one, isn't it?
Yeah. It's Thich Nhat Hanh, I think that's her name.
Right. Yep.
Said about parenting, the greatest gift that a parent can give to a child is his or her happiness.
Yep. Yeah. And I think for me, that was really a big deal, because if you now being a parent as well, you know, when your parents are miserable, you aren't happy either. And so parents are always thinking about trying to make their kids happy when they themselves aren't. And that's the problem. The problem is that you should be spending time to make yourself happy. Like, I think our parents have a lot of unresolved things that they want to do in their life, and they feel this like moral obligation to, like, you know, do it for their kids, sacrifice it for their kids. I'm like, we don't have to sacrifice anymore. We should be living a very happy and fulfilling life ourselves in order for our kids to also enjoy life, because otherwise the trauma gets pushed onto our kids as well. So that quote is really massive, because going through this process as well, there was a lot of like unhappiness and trauma that was unresolved right through to the end. It was really fucking hard. So you don't want to go to the end and just have a lot of regrets and a lot of things that you wish you did. So yeah, I think there's way too much of like selflessness, I guess, almost in this situation, when we should be probably actually a little bit more selfish, because by being selfish, you're actually helping your kids as well. So yeah, that's the quote I wanted to end on.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing everything.
No problems.
Thanks, man.
All right. So hopefully everyone's learned something in here. Like, really, obviously, like it's like I finished the podcast like, you know, because it's a little bit deep, but
it's heavy.
Yeah, it is heavy. But also want to make this discussion normal as well. So yeah, if you have any thoughts, I'm very open to DMs and messages as well. If anyone like is struggling with this or wants to just talk about it, very happy to also do that as well. So you can get us either on Instagram, send us an email, wherever you can get us, and more than happy to reply. All right. See you guys next time.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Level Asian podcast, solo episodes. If you enjoyed this one, please support us by giving us 5 stars or sharing it with your friends and family who might enjoy it too. If you have any topics that you would like us to cover, please DM us on Instagram at Level Asian Pod. Also, don't forget to head on over to levelasianpodcast.com to join our email list and receive the latest updates and get notified on when the next episode drops. Catch you on the next episode.